professor at the University of Kentucky in the Agricultural Economics Department. If there's anything going on in the world of hemp right now, Tyler is probably involved in it, just from the list of things he is currently researching and working on. So we have a very good panel here today to talk about this. So we will get started with, if you guys would like to talk about what some of your ongoing research is in this area to kind of let people know what you're doing and what we're doing. We'll start with Nicole so she can talk about what's going on in Maryland.
Oh, can you guys hear me okay? Okay. Sounds weird up here. Okay. Good morning. Thank you guys for coming. It's nice to see more people filed in as the morning went on. So as Paul introduced me, I'm the extension agronomist for University of Maryland. And when I started back in 2018, he used the right words. I kind of got sucked into the industrial hemp research. And that's when we started back in about 2018. And it took the university about a year to figure out how we could legally start doing some of this research in order to make sure we were not jeopardizing our federal funding. So it was really about 2019 before we were actually able to get plants in the ground and start our agronomic research. So we initially started looking at CBD floral type hemp, and we kind of hit the ground running, trying to evaluate where the optimum nitrogen fertilizer rate was going to be, so that growers who were interested in producing CBD hemp could include that as part of their nutrient management plans. We also were curious to see not only what nitrogen rate was going to maximize yield, but to see how nitrogen rate was going to have an effect on phytochemicals, both the desirable phytochemicals like CBD and other cannabinoids, as well as undesirable phytochemicals like THC. We wanted to make sure that adding additional fertilizer was not going to be a problem in terms of legally producing hemp and not jumping over into marijuana. So we hit the ground running initially with CBD hemp, but since about simultaneously, about the same time, we also were curious to start doing some research on fiber and grain hemp as well. So we participated in some national variety trials that actually came out of University of Kentucky. And we have also been evaluating what depth to plant hemp and fiber hemp specifically, and what is the optimal planting date. And you might think, wow, it really sounds like you're starting over from the beginning. And we really are kind of starting over from the beginning with this crop. We really don't know how to grow this crop very well. It's not like corn and soybean and our other commodity crops where there have been, 100 years of research, and we really don't think about the varieties. We just kind of get out there and plant it. So we really are kind of, I'd say, starting at the beginning again in terms of making sure that we have production recommendation for our growers. And this is all kind of ahead of the game, I will say. We don't have a whole lot of producers in the state of Maryland who are currently producing hemp. But we plan to be ready in terms of University of Maryland Extension. We plan to be ready with production recommendations, if and when this industry takes off and growers really do want to hit the ground running. We want to be there to provide the support in terms of production recommendations for this crop.
So I guess, unlike Nicole, in 2014, I jumped into this crop feet first just because nobody else in my department was willing to do it. So I just took off on that. Plus, I've got 7 generations of Kentucky farmer in my blood. So, and I can go back and find the historical hemp records from where hemp was produced on our farm. So it was kind of a fun little piece, but that has really drawn me into almost every single topic in the hemp space since that point. And we actually do have records for hemp going back hundreds of years. They're just illicit, and you can't publish or access any of that from its cousin. So you just can't put that data out there. But many states have those records going back. So I work on everything from basically the farm level and regulatory components all the way through the consumer. So we're doing stuff at the consumer level on who consumes this products, how much do they consume, what might they like to have, or how would they think it is labeled. I can tell you right now, there's tons of miseducation, or there's needs for education on this crop, because if you look at a lot of our studies, it would basically say that there's lots of consumer confusion on what is hemp and what is marijuana. And it's a huge problem in that space, and getting this industry to grow. I did a lot of the original enterprise budgets at the farm level that are still used today, and looking at the economics and viability of that. One of the early papers we put out was a congressional report talking about the economic viability of hemp from the 2014 pilot program. We're getting ready to redo that again for the 2018 Farm Bill as we gear up for the 23 Farm Bill, and trying to look at regulatory gaps and holes in that as well, and opportunities to push this industry forward. I'm also looking at the feed side of it, which is another kind of interesting component. We're looking at aquaculture specifically, and that's a fairly large market there that has some issues with some of the feed sources that they're currently using. If those were outlawed, how would you feed those fish in that space a diet that is as rich, if not richer, in nutrients for that animal going forward? So we're looking at that. We're also looking at contracts and risk in this space, crop insurance specifically, and then the contracts. I'm sure some of you have seen some of the contracts and what happens with them, and how they look, and some of the things that they are completely missing. And Paul's been heading that up for that component, but yeah, it's kind of where I'm at.
Okay. Yeah, and I forgot to mention, this panel is being sponsored. We use money from our USDA grant on risk management to cover a lot of the costs for this panel today. So none of this information we provide, USDA condones anything that we're talking about today, or I forget the rest of the disclaimers I'm supposed to use that we're supposed to talk about in that, but we put enough out there that we're good. So with our next question, the way we wanted to talk about this was, we have had successes and some setbacks with this. And we're going to start with the Mid-Atlantic, kind of looking at what's been the successes in the Mid-Atlantic, Nicole, and then move it on, since Tyler has much more of a national focus. Think about what's been the successes and challenges nationally.
Sure. I'll start with the successes, because I think there may be fewer of them. I guess that was a joke. Thank you, the one person who laughed. So I think, well, I don't know how to frame this as a success or not. I mean, I think I'm struggling here to come up with successes, Paul. I think we were fairly successful at initially putting together kind of a very quick and dirty pilot program to kind of get this new crop in a somewhat organized manner, in a somewhat organized manner out on farms. And there were successful partnerships that were developed between private growers, University of Maryland Eastern Shore, other institutions of higher education. I think there were some successful partnerships that did come out of that. But I think a challenge of that was that the institutions of higher education had no more knowledge at the time than the growers who were putting this crop out at the field. Everyone was planting this crop for the first time that first year. I don't think I've ever answered so many questions with "I don't know" in my life. Like, this really humbled me, because people asked a lot of questions, and the university, we just did not have the answers yet. So success in the sense of we were really able to get these partnerships going quickly, but I don't know that it really panned out in a very successful way. I don't think there's a lot of those original partnerships, folks who are still producing hemp. And so I think that kind of folds over into the challenges. We as the university just didn't have a leg up and didn't have a chance to gain any additional knowledge prior to this crop being introduced kind of widespread across the state. And I don't think we really had a very clear idea of what was going to happen with all of this material that was produced once it was harvested. And really once it kind of came out of the field, what was going to happen with this, and how are folks going to make money? And Tyler mentioned the idea of the contracts. I mean, some of these growers didn't even realize they were supposed to have a contract, didn't realize they were supposed to have an outlet for this material before they even put it in the field, right? And so, as Tyler mentioned, I think there is a huge need for some additional education and just on how to successfully and profitably produce this crop. Another challenge kind of locally, more in the mid-Atlantic region, maybe compared to nationally, is that, we're in a really tough just growing area. There's kind of a joke that if you want to see if a crop is going to get a disease, grow it in Maryland, because we really kind of have like the perfect storm of growing conditions. We have warm, kind of humid growing seasons. And so, like that first year when everyone said, what kind of diseases, should I expect in this crop? I mean, we found it out that first year. We all found it out together. So, I think that produces a challenge, not only just with hemp, but with other, commodity crops, even specialty crops too, that, compared to other parts of the country, it's a lot more intensive. We have a lot more intensive management here in this region to produce the same quality, the same type of crop as, other maybe drier parts of the country. And so we tend to struggle, I think, sometimes being competitive because it just costs more to produce a quality crop here of a lot of different crops, but I think especially for hemp as well. So that's kind of a local challenge. And I'd say locally still, 2022, we still don't really have solid processing options for folks. So there may be folks who are interested in getting into hemp or they're really thinking about it, but it's still really not clear what they're going to do. We have maybe two potential processors who would be purchasing, fiber hemp. And neither of them are really up off the ground yet. We're still begging them to get a copy of their contracts so that you can look at them, Paul, because I mean, truly, it's difficult for us to recommend that our growers, hop on with a processor when we're not clear how that relationship is going to kind of pan out. So I think we're still in the infancy here in the mid-Atlantic compared to other parts of the country that I'm sure Tyler's going to mention here as well.
Yeah, so I guess I would take that a step further. I mean, did anybody pay attention to what happened with CBD in Major League Baseball last week?
Mhm.
Yeah, Charlotte's Web signed a $30 million as the official CBD sponsor of Major League Baseball. So obviously something and someone has made some money here. Now, we all hear about the disaster stories of producers who lost everything. I can tell you from many of the talks that I gave, the advice was not to spend any more money than you were willing to lose, and they did it anyway. So it's a hard lesson to learn, but it is also one of those things where producers in the agricultural space are very used to a norm of I'll produce a crop and there will be a market. This was a brand new crop that came in that did not have a market established. We did not understand what consumption patterns would be. We still have FDA having not made a ruling on what happens there. So you don't know what happens with the human consumption and animal consumption, components of CBD and some of those things. And I think we really grew way too fast on the CBD side of the coin. And that's kind of hurt a lot of the other spaces. But there are some other companies across the country that are really starting to gain some tractions. And if you were to look at a map of production across the country, you would look up in the Great Plains and you would see quite a bit of grain and fiber starting to be produced in those spaces. Canada has historically been the hemp grain production space on the globe. And most of it comes out there. We're seeing a lot of companies partner with Manitoba Hemp, which is a company in Canada, basically the only processor left up there. They're partnering and doing a lot of things here in the US. So there's two major companies here in the US that are working on that, one in Kentucky, one in Montana. And they're really pushing the envelope on what we can do with the grain space as we start to think about more growing plant-based meat type market. We're starting to see some move into that. I mean, we got lots of pressure on our soybeans in terms of other areas to go into in terms of renewable diesel. And then we're seeing also an increase in crush capacity in the country as well. So that's putting upward price pressure on soybeans. Peas is another big one that goes into the plant-based meat space. But it's missing some amino acids. Well, some of those amino acids come in from the hemp side of the coin to fill some of that gap. So there's some obvious plays or potential plays in that space. In the fiber space, we're starting to see a lot of things come along there. I think originally it was a field of dreams. We will build this fiber plant and people will come and buy this stuff. Well, that's really not the case, because we were thinking about it from, well, we're going to grow this, but we don't have an end market. You really have to turn that around and think about, what is your end market? Are you going into the automobiles? Are you going into the bioplastics? Where are these spaces that you're going? And what are the types of standards or, tensile strength, those types of things that you got to have in that crop to be able to move into that supply chain. So there's a lot of companies now that have kind of put the brakes on a lot of things and are now trying to figure that out and working from the end of the supply chain back through the system, and genetics and production practices, I think will change as we continue to move down that road. I think one of the other big successes is, I mean, let's think about the amount of research and work that was done originally, in that 2014 to 2016 timeframe, basically with no research dollars to do that. And most universities have kind of gotten up to speed as quickly as possible. Now we're starting to see some research dollars flow into this space to research a crop that was out of production for 80 years and is already behind the 8 ball there. So we're going to play some catch up there. And, so I think there are some real successes starting to come out of this. I'm kind of glad to see that bubble burst and we come back to reality and realize where we're at as an industry, and that we are a little bitty fish in a great big pond of, a whole lot of production. And now let's see if we can grow at some sort of reasonable rate versus trying to grow 10, 15, 100% a year, like we were doing between 16 and 19. We were more than doubling every year during part of that period. So yeah, I think we've had some real successes in that space. I think the big hurdles are really regulatory has been one of the big ones. And how do we get the regulatory components? I mean, if you look across the country, each state that is not within the USDA program has a different licensing fee. Well, that different licensing fee impacts cost of production for those producers. They may either require the processor to be licensed or may not be licensed. There's still confusion on interstate transportation of some of these products, and then we still need some additional regulatory clarity from the 2013 or 2023 Farm Bill to really help move this forward. I'll leave it there.
Okay. Yeah, we do need a lot more regulatory clarity in a lot of areas just to make this work a little bit better. FDA, could actually do some stuff, but we won't get into that. So looking at some of the other challenges that face the industry, we talked, Nicole kind of hit upon this. We're having issues with processors coming into the state. What are the challenges being faced by processors, within this region and nationally, that we're seeing why they're not moving in or why they're failing in certain areas?
Sure, I'll start. Well, I think the biggest thing on the processor side is, if I'm a processor and I'm sitting on the sidelines and I'm watching this market develop, well, one, we haven't had clear regulation from FDA on what's allowed on the CBD side. So do I want to invest money in that, not knowing or having regulatory clarity on what's going to happen there? If you're on the feed side, you haven't wanted to step in there either. If you're on the chemical side, you may not want to step in on that side either. So I think what you're seeing a lot of very small operations move in and try and raise capital to put these processing components together. But I think once we get some more clarity on the regulatory side, you will start to see those larger ag companies step into this market once they know what's going to happen across the landscape. So you will see a real infusion of money at that point in time. But until then, I think that's going to be a struggle to get to happen. At least that's what I've seen from all that I've worked with.
Yeah, I think and Tyler's national perspective is kind of echoed here locally. I think we have kind of been fondly referring to it as the chicken and the egg issue, right? If we're not producing material here, what's going to attract someone to come in and want to process that material and move it forward? So do we try to set up some type of a program where we would incentivize a processor to establish themselves here in our region to generate the material? So, or do we try to generate some material to try to entice a company to, want to be attracted to this area? It's really kind of a tricky, sticky situation. We really don't know how to help we, in terms of the university and through extension, we don't really know how to help that process along. Other than, I mean, we are trying to continue our research and hopefully generate some small amount of material that could be used to kind of start up a potential processing company. But I think that that's kind of what we're seeing locally, is that there's a lot of people who are dipping their toe in or saying that they're interested in developing an industry here, but no one, as far as we've seen so far, has really fully committed. And, only because I saw some of my farm credit friends here, is there an issue with getting, as Tyler mentioned, some capital to really be able to start up? I mean, obviously this is going to be capital intensive to, purchase a property, set up an actual physical facility to be processing. So, going back to that need for education, is there some need for education with our lenders that they need to understand, better understand the risks, the true risks involved with, this type of lending? So, there are a lot of challenges that need to be approached from different aspects to be able to help kind of solve this problem. Or we just need someone who just is very independently wealthy and wants to just do this on their own, and as Tyler mentioned, like, if you're not afraid to lose money, jump into it. But, I think, that's kind of the situation where we're at here locally, which is interesting because I think we have a lot of potential generally in the Mid-Atlantic region. We're very close to some major population centers. Like, I think this is actually a great area to potentially start up a new business. On the fiber side, we're looking at some potential processors who are interested in producing horse bedding, right? So taking our fiber material and selling it to horse farms. We've got a huge concentration of horses here in not only Maryland, but, across the Mid-Atlantic with our multiple racetracks in the area. So there is truly potential, and you can develop a sound business model based on it. It's just someone needs to jump in and actually kind of take that first step and do it. So
we got a few horses too.
I know you do.
You guys have.
We do
horses in
too,
Kentucky?
though.
And we've looked at that horse bedding issue, and I find it interesting, but it's not high value enough, in my opinion, from an economic standpoint to justify buying acres away from other crops. So that's kind of where we're at.
Can I echo one more? Can I say one more thing in addition? No, I'm not going to put down. You're spot on. I agree. I don't think it's a high enough mark. It's not a high enough value to kind of justify that. But Tyler brought up a really good point that I think we're struggling with from the production research side. Is we're constantly asking these processors, what do you need the growers to deliver to you? How do you want this product? How do you want this material delivered? And when we constantly are told, I don't know, I can't help growers create the product that's going to be desirable. And so it goes back to Tyler, we really have to start at the end use. So what is your end goal? Are you trying to produce fiber material that, Ford Motor Company is going to put into the, parts of their car, the fake wood that goes into the car, right? What is the end product? What does the processor need to deliver to that final buyer? And what do they need the farmer to deliver to them, right? And so I think we're kind of stalling around this question, and I constantly keep asking these potential processors, tell me what you want to deliver and we will help the farmers deliver it. They don't know on their end too. And so we're kind of at a stalemate until they really do that market research and they've identified what that end use of this material is going to be. We can help them produce it, but the market has to decide, or someone has to decide what that end product is going to be.
So looking at some of the other challenges, you've already hit on Charlotte's Web sponsoring Major League Baseball and becoming the official sponsor for CBD. What are some of the challenges that are being faced within the CBD market in allowing it either to grow or reach its full potential?
Well, I mean, one of the challenges in the CBD market is if you were to back out all the numbers, maybe 10 to 15% of the US population is going to consume, and how many milligrams they consume. I mean, we're probably in the ballpark of 10,000 acres or less to satisfy that market as it currently stands. Well, if that's the case, then let's see, in Kentucky in 2019, we grew almost 20,000 acres. And we weren't the only state that did that. So we have stockpiled tons of biomass around the country. Now, the good news is one, for the most part, it's either degraded to the point now where it's absolutely worthless. It's been processed into something like crude where it is still available to store, or it's been processed into other products that you may or may not want to talk about. And then, or, so we've worked through the majority of that now. So we're probably down to, in 2020, we were probably over 200 million tons of biomass sitting around. Now we're probably down less than 50 million tons or 50,000 tons. Get my numbers right here this morning. 50,000 tons sitting around. So we've worked through a lot of that. So we are starting to see some prices increase now. And I think this year you're actually going to start to see, we have seen some markets around the country have some shortages in that space. And we've seen those CBD prices come back up. Now, if we get down the road and we find out that CBD potentially has medical benefit, does it become something like soybeans that you turn around your package and soybeans is in everything? If that happens, then that 10,000 acre number starts to really explode, and we start to really push that market forward. But then you've got all the other cannabinoids in there too: CBG, CBN, CBA, terpenes that all have some value too. I just don't think that we've really understood yet what that market really looks like for those other minor cannabinoids in that.
You want to throw anything in? Okay. I guess I'll go to our next question we have on the list, since it kind of is a hot topic and people are thinking about it now. We are seeing a rise in Delta 8 coming on the market. So I guess the first question is, what is Delta 8 for those that are not aware of what Delta 8 is? And then how will this potentially impact how hemp is produced and grown and some of the challenges to the industry?
Sure, I'll swing at that. Whatever.
I gave them a hard question.
So Delta 8, if you're unaware, let's start out at the basic process. So Delta 8 is not economically viably produced at the plant level. So you basically got to take your crude, you got to go all the way to isolate, and then you're going to process Delta 8 out of the isolate. Delta 8 is a psychoactive, just like Delta 9. I'm not a chemist, I'm an economist. So, so it's not quite as psychoactive as Delta 9, but it is there's lots of gray area, and lawyers, you all can argue over it. I enjoy seeing that sometimes. It's a huge gray area, but it came as a result of the CBD market. Prices were tanking in that space. We had to find a way to get rid of this excess biomass. Some people were very good at chemistry and figured out that they could synthetically produce Delta 8. It could be a psychoactive. It could get under that. They were able to right now produce it in that gray area and be able to sell that in a number of states. So that's how they worked through this big, huge pile of biomass. So if you really want to know where that pile of biomass went, it went into Delta 8, and it's still going into Delta 8. I would say that people will get very creative when their business is on the line, and they will find lots of different ways to get that under that. Now, the downside of that is I think that has brought it into even more competition with the marijuana market, and you're starting to see some states look at, well, if you're going to do that, then we're also going to tax you, and you're going to be regulated like the marijuana industry. And in many cases, some states have stuck the cannabinoid and the marijuana regulatory component in the same office. So you are going to see that. I think that's been a downside to this side of the industry, is that, you've made that bridge even closer and harder to ever separate, because now you're starting to see people say, well, grain and fiber aren't the same. Well, I'm sorry, they're all still produced from cannabis stevia. And the milk industry, the dairy industry, hadn't been able to separate milk from almond milk from cashew milk. So what makes you think that a plant that produces all of those types of things, you're going to be able to separate that out long term? I think it's going to be very difficult So I think that's another education issue we're going to have to deal with down the road. But I think it's had somewhat of a negative impact on the grain and fiber space trying to come along to think about that as well. Luckily, we haven't really seen any huge food safety issue come up
Mhm.
because that synthetic production of Delta 8 can have some issues there if the chemistry isn't right and can produce some not fun things to deal with from a food safety standpoint. So we haven't had any huge breakouts with that. But I think if you did have something like that, that would pretty much be an end to some of that for now. So we're sitting on a knife's edge, I guess, with that.
Okay. We can move on from that and move on to sort of looking at this from some local issues. And here in Maryland, we had a lot of issues initially with some of the first crops with people complaining about odors and other stuff related to the crop. Where are we at with that now, and what is being done to sort of prevent some of that with the research that you guys are doing, some of those concerns? And then I can,
From a research
yeah,
perspective.
from a research perspective. It's a hard word to say.
I don't know that we're doing major real formal research on it. I think we're trying to keep our ears to the ground and pay attention that this is a potential issue when you're growing. I don't know if odoriferous is the right word, but I'm going to use it because it sounds good. When you're
Sounds very
growing
professional.
odoriferous crop like that in a highly, urban, suburban area, I think it's bound to happen, right? Everyone likes driving past a field of corn because it looks beautiful and it doesn't really impact you in any negative way. What? You don't like driving past a beautiful field of corn?
I just get tired of driving past corn.
You've got way more corn in your state than we do in our state. And a field of corn isn't really hurting anyone, but when there's purported claims that someone who is producing hemp is having negative health impacts on humans just by their, relative proximity to that field, it becomes an issue. And then that falls into the challenges category that we've just been discussing about growing this industry, right? When there's going back to that education, when someone is feeling that there are negative health implications because their neighbor is producing a crop that just happens to be a little stinky, it's really going to negatively impact that market. So in terms of research, I don't know that we're doing much management, boots on the ground research per se. I don't know that we can make the plant smell less. That could be a genetic effort by, someone in a genetic space, but that's really not what we're focusing on. We're just trying to kind of pay attention to what's happening, what you keep us in the loop with, Paul, kind of what's going on in terms of that. I was thinking when we talked about this question, there's a concern in terms of, and maybe Tyler's experienced this in another state, growing CBD type hemp and growing fiber and grain hemp in too close of proximity to one another. There's a potential pollination effect. The fiber and the grain type plants can potentially fertilize or pollinate the CBD type plants, rendering that plant useless, right? And so how does one decide, how do you decide which neighbor gets to grow CBD hemp and which neighbor gets to grow fiber hemp? How do you tell someone who's been growing CBD hemp, well, your neighbor's going to start growing fiber hemp now that could potentially ruin your crop? And so from a legal aspect or a land use kind of area aspect, I think there could be a potential issue that on the horizon there. I don't think it's really arose yet here, at least in Maryland. I don't know if Tyler has any experience with that anywhere else, but it could potentially be an issue here where we've got kind of smaller parcels of land much more close together. And from a research perspective, we have been purposefully growing CBD hemp on the same farm where we've been growing fiber hemp to try to evaluate if we've seen some pollination, and we have. So it's a very real potential that it could happen here in Maryland. Have you experienced that issue elsewhere across the country? Okay.
So, and I guess on both of those fronts, I think both of them are kind of genetic driven on both those fronts. The first one of the smell, I think, is related to the terpenes and the specific terpene profile within that, and they are looking at how they can turn off or turn on those different terpene terpenes that create those aromas that come out of that side of the coin. And I think what you'll also find is different varieties, cultivars, strains, whatever the agronomist of the day has decided to call it, it, you know, will change what that profile smells like as well. But you can look at, you know, I've had a number of calls with groups in Colorado about they're looking at how they zone their county to protect the marijuana producers and not have, you know, grain or fiber anywhere close to that. If you look at Humboldt County in California, they've flat out outlawed the production of hemp in that county, just because it's the largest marijuana producing county in that state, so that they don't have to deal with those issues. I think those issues are probably somewhat overblown, because the flowering dates for those are quite different. You know, we are looking at some economic research to look at what is the economic impact of these crops being grown in close proximity to one another. I've got data from Kentucky. I've got another colleague with data in Colorado. We're looking at those two now to see if we can actually put together what is the economic impact of having that crop fertilized. And yes, it will decrease the CBD content to some degree in that current crop, but it's really if you're saving seed for the next year where you start to see the real impacts of that come about. If you were saving seed from that CBD strain of hemp to produce the next year. So, you know, they are both issues that I think will be solved from the genetics point of view.
And now with our remaining 7 minutes, I'll open it up to questions from the audience. The first one I'm going to go with was one that's online. I already attempted to answer one as we've been talking from Joanne. Because part of your question involves an illegal product under federal law, we actually can't answer your question. So we will, we have to skip that question. Sorry about that. There are enough administrators in this room. I am not touching anything that is illegal under federal law. And then, oh.
You guys touched on this maybe a little bit, but what are some changes you think need to be made in the next farm bill, both from a sort of like societal good standpoint and also to help farmers of this crop?
Sure, I'll start. Well, I think the one thing is the regulatory component, specifically from FDA. Are we going to be able to put this into food products? How is it going to go into food products? We already starting to see states do it themselves. Now the problem is those products can't leave the state, so they have to be consumed within the state. So we're starting to see that framework come about. So regulatory clarity there, regulatory clarity on the feed side would be key as well, because keep in mind when you're producing grain and once you've extracted the oil, you still have this seed cake that you got to do something with, and that would be an obvious market to pick up. Some of that would be the feed component, because if not, you've got a whole bunch of material that has very little economic value, and it's really hard to pencil in a profit just on the oil side of that coin. I think those would be two big things. Another big one you're going to hear about is THC, and should it be raised to 1%? I will give you both sides of the coin on that. If I'm a processor, I want it to be raised to 1%, because keep in mind, if I'm specifically on the CBD side, I'm about a 25-to-1 ratio. So 25, you know, if I have 0.3, then that's about 7.5% CBD concentration. If I go to a 1%, now I'm at 25% CBD concentration. From a processing standpoint, I've just really increased my processing efficiency. And I've also really lowered my transaction costs, because I'm going to cut out about, the majority of my farmers, because all I need is one or two very large processors to process that 10,000 acres, to produce that 10,000 acres total I need. Okay, that's great. Now, if I'm on the production side of the coin, I don't know that I really want to go to a 1%, because now you've got to get larger. Probably you got to have a very solid contract in place. So it's going to shut out the market for a lot of smaller producers that are just trying to get into this and try and look at that to start with. So there's pros and cons on both sides of that coin. So those are some things that I would think about. I would also think about, how do we change the crop insurance program to actually provide a somewhat semblance of protection? Right now, the yields and stuff in that are so low that we're not providing much protection at all in that space. Now it's going to take some time. We're probably starting to get enough data now where in some of these states that have been around since I guess 2020 is when that started, 2019, one of the two, to really start building up enough data to understand what these yields are. However, keep in mind, a lot of these varieties that we're bringing into this country were grown at different latitudes. So what grows well here in Maryland may not grow very well in Kentucky. And definitely we're seeing what grows really well in the plains and up around Canada does not grow well in Kentucky. So we're still working through the genetics on that piece as well. And I guess I should always put a pitch in. We always need more funding.
Yeah, I was going to say that too, actually. I think you maybe said it before, like, yeah, we're getting some funding, but I think from a university standpoint to do some of this research, we are struggling to get the funding. And, you know, a lot of our institutions, I'm sure Kentucky has been the same way, you know, the first year or two was willing to throw us a bone and give us a little bit of money to get started. But, you know, that doesn't sustain us very long. I think, you know, we've spent out a lot of that money very quickly, and we've been aggressively applying for federal funding the past couple growing seasons, and it's not panning out. You know, a lot of the USDA programs, they just don't know where to fit hemp into the funding structure. So we've been kind of farming this out to a lot of different federal programs, and no one's really biting on this. So if there was a way to increase the funding to the universities doing some of this research through the Farm Bill would be fantastic. So we could kind of continue doing this work.
And Kevin will be our last question.
And it's a quick one. For Nicole, so we do have some case studies in the state and in the region of some successful smaller and mid-scale hemp growers who have found a market for their product and it's going well. But let's assume for a minute that we get one of these mythical processor manufacturers to set up shop and to have capacity to manage and buy thousands of acres of hemp. How confident are you that the university, the industry, and also, you know, from Kentucky within the region, how confident are you that we have the knowledge and the skill set and the research to widespread, large-scale grow hemp successfully?
So I'm probably supposed to say, yeah, I'm 100% positive. We got this. And I mean, and I think to an extent, we probably could muster something together, you know, pretty quickly to support, you know, a growing industry. I think if there was a processor who was going to pop up and say, you know, I need X thousands of acres, I'm sure we could find some friendly farmers who are already well established that could kind of transition for a year or two to produce some material. I have no doubts about that kind of in the initial, hey, let's get some material out there grown locally. I think we could. But I think the real key component there of what I just said was we would jump on board with existing farmers, folks who already have the land, the capital, the equipment. I think starting up you know, if a processor was to start up tomorrow, it's going to take time for new farms, new enterprises to really be able to get on board and get into that space here locally in Maryland, in my opinion. So we could cobble something together for a short amount of time to help make those processors be successful. But then it's also going to take time for new market, you know, new growers to jump on board and really get that capital and get themselves up to speed. From an educational standpoint, I think we're getting there. I think we've got some a good start in terms of, hey, you want to grow hemp? Here's how you do it. I think we have enough knowledge now in the past few growing seasons to really help some new growers get on board. But that's a really great question. And there's really a distinction there. Knowledgeable and existing growers could probably jump on board pretty quick. New growers, there's going to be a lag time, and there's going to be that educational component that needs to be there. And then the, you know, financial backing support there to kind of keep them viable. So great question. That was a good one, Kevin.
Yeah. No, I would like to see, you know, that company have enough money to put in escrow to pay those producers to provide that stability there. And do they have that type of financing? Do they have the offtake agreements to be able to do that? I think you've already started, you know, Cornell's already started on a breeding program. I think they're going to have some things that come out fairly quickly. So, I mean, I think we're moving along on the genetic component. I think that's only going to get better. I mean, if you look at corn and soybeans, I mean, what 2% a year or so in terms of yield increases and whatnot. So I think we could see an escalated yield curve for that, for hemp, in a couple of years as those genetics continue to come out. So I think there are opportunities to do that. It's just getting everything lined up to be able to do it.
Why don't we give our